You can turn off your video because we are going to record this all except for the film Imprisoning a Generation. We have a contract with them where we're not allowed to do that. They're renting it out to people. I'm glad to be walking together with all of you through this time of Lent as we talk about peace in Palestine, Israel. Our group is really from all over the country, and it represents multiple faiths and denominations. So that's very special. I especially want to welcome and thank our responder, Jennifer Bing, for this evening. Jennifer is the director of the Palestine Activism Program for American Friends Service Committee, AFSC, in Chicago. She began her advocacy for Palestinian children after working as a teacher in a Quaker school in Ramallah during the first Palestinian uprising in 1986. She has documented the impact of the first popular uprising on Palestinian children. And Jennifer currently works with Defense for Children International Palestine on their joint advocacy campaign. And it's called Israeli Military Detention, No Way to Treat a Child. She also co-leads the educational project, Gaza Unlocked, with her AFSC colleagues in the US and Gaza. And so we want to welcome Jennifer. Welcome, Jennifer. You have all received the UCC Palestine Israel Network resolution for General Synod this summer. If you have interest in starting a process of endorsing that resolution, please email me and I will send you how you can take steps to do that. On March 17th, we will be sending out a whole bunch of action steps, and that will be included as well. Tonight, for our Lenten walk, we will identify with children who are caught in this conflict. Identify is our focus word for this series. I personally read through the roles that Maria Corey has written with me typing. She's a Palestinian American, and I identified the most with number 14. This was a young man named Obada, who's a 15-year-old Palestinian teenage boy from a Mari refugee camp in Ramallah in the West Bank. There are over 8,000 people in 1 square mile in that camp. And he is musically gifted and dreaming of getting out of that refugee camp with his musical talent. He wants to go to Jerusalem to a studio to make a clip, and the time there has been paid for by the Norwegians. It's a one-time frame experience. He has a 1-day permit only to get there, and he's in a hurry or he'll lose his chance. I really identify with him because in around 1990 or so, I had the opportunity to record. I was given money to record. I had a chance to go in a great studio with a great engineer and had my friend come from California to sing. So I had such a fun time. They could barely scrape me off the ceiling. I was having such a fun time. And I just feel for this kid because he needs to have that opportunity, that freedom to get through the wall, to get to Jerusalem, to be able to record and have the possibility of breaking out of the refugee camp with his talent. But we can also identify with the Israeli soldiers who are standing at checkpoints. Can we do that? Or wandering the streets of the West Bank. And they're ordered to cause trouble for Palestinian families and individuals, pressured by their government and families to serve in the military immediately out of high school. And if they refuse, they face shunning and anger from their families who have all served. Everybody serves. Can we identify with these kids stuck carrying automatic weapons and urged to mistreat Palestinians, to humiliate them into subservience so they will fear rising up again? When my brother was in Vietnam, serving in the army, I was in Washington, D.C. marching against the war. And believe me, that Thanksgiving was not a fun dinner table to be at. They were furious with me, and that's why I identify with the Jewish refuseniks who are saying, no, I'm not going to serve in the military, and also the ones who go in because it's just a terrible position to be put in. These kids are squeezed in a terrible way. Tonight, I have some prophetic anger because I was talking with my friend Maria Corey yesterday, and she was telling me about the vaccinations in Palestine, Israel. In the West Bank, the American news is saying that Israel's doing a great job with their vaccinations. You hear that on their news. In reality, in the West Bank, no vaccinations are available to the Palestinians. They're being given to internationals and to Americans. Not even Palestinian doctors or first responders are getting vaccinations. Israel has promised to send vaccinations to Guatemala because they moved their embassy to Jerusalem, Honduras for promising to open a diplomatic office in Jerusalem, Hungary for a trade mission with Israel, and Czechoslovakia, the Czech Republic, because they offer political support to Israel. The people living under Israeli military occupation in the West Bank and Gaza are not being protected. So that makes me angry at our government who supports Israel. So I'd like to read to you two other pieces, two small pieces. One written by Reverend Lauren McGrail, who was a missionary to the YWCA of Palestine. And it's called Where We Can Find Him, a Prayerful Rant. Mother, Father God, whose name is not honored where your children are not welcomed, protected, or provided for, where they are racially or ethnically profiled, frisked, picked up, beaten, where they are poisoned by tear gas or unclean water from Gaza to Flint, Michigan, where they are shot on the mean streets of Ferguson or Jerusalem, in suburban schools or on the Gaza border, where they are caged in detention centers in Texas or prisons in Israel, separated from their parents, no legal representation, no rights, lonely in the long days and nights, where 12,800 children are held in tent cities, where 500 children are held in dark cells, in the cold, without the warmth of their mother, where they are sold into the sex trade or sexually harassed at military checkpoints, warehoused like chattel, no one looking, caring, or speaking out, where poor schools are underfunded or demolished because they were built without a permit, education a right denied, where hospitals in poor neighborhoods are understaffed, where hospitals who serve children and with cancer are defunded, healthcare a human right violated, where children are not welcomed, protected, or provided for, God is not honored. Jesus reminds us again, for the final time, that the last shall be first, that a child welcomed will be where we can find him and the one who sent him. And then a final piece. This is called End of a Talk with a Jailer, and it's a Palestinian who wrote this. From the narrow window of my cell, I see trees smiling at me and rooftops crowded with my family and widows weeping and praying for me. From the narrow window of my small cell, I can see your big cell, your big cell. Amen. So our first film this evening is one that was created by an Ainsworth UCC mini grant. It's the YWCA of Palestine film. We hope to raise money with this film to help get this boy who's in a wheelchair since as a little boy, and he's outgrown it. We hope to get him an electronic wheelchair for his family. And we also hope to get food packets, medical kits, and hygiene kits for the camps that the YWCA of Palestine serve. In our action steps on the last night when we are together, we will tell you how you can get money through the UCC Global Ministries to the YWC and then to this family and to the camps. So I ask that as we watch the movie, if you would please send any questions or comments you have to Allison Brinkhorst. She is our moderator this evening, and put them in the chat box, and she will pass them on to Jennifer Bing after the 2 films. Allison, can you please tell folks how they might get rid of the full gallery as we watch the movie? And it doesn't work for everybody. For some people it does. Allison?
Sure, yes. So since this first one is only, I can't remember, maybe 5 or 10 minutes long, but our second film this evening is about 51 minutes. So during that time, you probably don't want our faces covering the screen if possible. So one way that you can get rid of our faces, once Cecil shares his screen, then our faces will kind of be in a separate window. If you hover over that, there should be a bar near the top that allows you to hide thumbnails from view. And if you do that, you'll be able to see us again once Cecil stops showing the films. But I recognize everyone's computers are a bit different, or maybe you're joining from a phone or a tablet. So welcoming you to hide the thumbnail videos if you can, so that you can see the full film.
Okay. And I hope that Cecil hears me. Hello, Cecil?
I'm sure he does.
I do.
We're all set, ready to show the first film. Thank you.
أنا ما بحب حياتي بشكل عام، لأن انحرم حمزة من كل إشي. حرم من المدرسة، حرم بيجي عيد عندي، بيجي تلبسة أول عيد، بشوفهمش عليه كتير. بتمنى من الله ربنا يشفي. يعني لو بدي أتمنى أنا إلي دار طابق أول ومدخل إني أطلع حمزة أعمل له مسجات وأخذه وين ما بدي. مشكلة الدرج، أنا كل حياتي مشكلة الدرج. وبضل مريض عند جهان في المخيم، رطوبة بشتاء، رطوبة بتقتلنا، يعني بضل صدره مسكر. أنا اسمي أم حمزة، إلي 5 أطفال، واحد منهم ذو الاحتياجات الخاصة، وساكن بمخيم الجلاجين. حمزة من يوم ما أجا من ذو الولادة عنده نقص أكسجين، وهي صار عمره 16 سنة.
المعاناة إحنا عانيناها كثير، مش نتفي يعني، عانينا كثير في المخيم. هذا في المهاجرة، يعني أول ما هاجرنا وجينا على المخيم هين إحنا والله بكوا تعبانين العالم، يعني مش مرتاحين.
إلي 15 سنة معي ضغط ومعي السكري، معي دهنيات على الكبد، وما نعتمدش غير على دواء الوكالة، ما نقدرش نشتري، وهن شاب مقعد، ضبطهم منعوا عن الشغال يعني.
والله في ختيارية ما بيقدروا يقيموا الحرام يتغطوا، وما فيش حدا يساعدهم يقيم معهم يغطيهم يغسل لهم يجيب لهم شغلة. أنا بتمنى للختيارية حياة منيحة، تساعدوهم في الدواء في مصروفهم، يعني واحد محتاج لازم نساعده.
تهرب من المسؤوليات من الجميع. احنا حقوقنا بنقدر نسميها تائهه في الوكاله، ناسينا في حكومه بيرموا على الوكاله بترمي على المؤسسات الاهليه والمؤسسات المحليه. المؤسسات المحليه في عندها تحدي كبير ان مش قادرين احنا ناخذ تمويل. ليش؟ لانه في كثير من المؤسسات الدوليه والمؤسسات المحليه ما بتشتغل في المخيمات لاسباب سياسيه ولا غيره. مجرد انها اشتعلت نار الكورونا في المخيم، كثير من الناس تعطلوا عن اعمالهم، كثير من الشباب فقدوا فرصهم للعمل لسبب انك انت من المخيم فيه كورونا.
طفلنا اليوم في مخيم الجلزون يعاني كثير من قلة المساحة اللي بيلعب فيها، لأنه بضل في البيوت ودائما في أزقة. التضاد السكاني والبيوت المزدحمة هو اللي بيخلي الطفل دائما في البيت، ما بيقدر يطلع لأنه فيش إشي آمن ولا حدائق آمنة ولا ساحات للعب. في نفس المساحة اللي كانت للمخيم في 48 لليوم إحنا في 2020 وهي نفس المساحة، فصار في عنا اقتضاد سكاني عالي، صار عنا أبنية عمودية كلها، صار في أزقة، صار في مخاطر على الطفل. لازم إحنا نخلص الطفل من هالمعاناة عشان نعمل مجتمع آمن. أنا بتمنى كثير إنه يكون في مخيمنا ساحات، يكون في مخيمنا وسع للحدائق عشان أطفالنا يضلوا يفرغوا، عشان يطلع هذا الطفل اللي هو رجل المستقبل، يطلع يبني هالمجتمع الآمن، يبني هالمجتمع المنيح. أنا كمربية في جمعية شابات المسيحية في مخيم الجلزون كتير بنسعى لنعمل الفرح في قلوب أطفالنا، فدايما في أي موقف أي شيء، في أي عيد في أي أعياد بنعمل دايما حفلات احتفالات بنفرحهم. دايما في عيد الكريسماس كل سنة بيجي سانتا كلوز وبيحتفل فيهم، بقدم لهم هالهدايا وبيكونوا كتير سعيدين ومبسوطين، لأنه أقل شيء بالنسبة للطفل هو بسعده وببسطه.
So deep breath. That's the Jalazon refugee camp. Now I'd like to introduce the award-winning film by Zelda Edmonds, which is a documentary following the stories of 4 young Palestinians who've been detained and imprisoned under Israeli military and political systems. Their perspectives, along with the voices of their families, form a lens into the entangled structures of oppression that expand well beyond the prison walls. We'll watch the next film, Imprisoning a Generation. There we go. So thank you all for watching the 2 films together. Please put your questions in the chat box and address them to Allison Brinkhorst. And as I turn over this call to Jennifer Bing to respond to, I'll kick us off with a couple of questions. Jennifer, hi. Would you please tell us about the No Way to Treat a Child campaign what you've achieved so far and where you are headed with it.
Sure, I'd be happy to. First of all, take a deep breath after that
I
film.
know.
It's it's such a powerful film, and it's been a few months since I've seen it, and I think every time I watch it, I just feel motivated even more so to keep doing this work. It's so compelling, and Zelda did such a nice job, I think, of both putting context to what's happening as well as talking about the process of child detention. The No Way Treated Child campaign, I see some supporters here on this call, and certainly Tom Beilman and others, really from the early days. It really started with Defense for Children International Palestine, which is an independent Palestinian human rights, child rights organization based in Ramallah. They've been around for over 25 years now. They do documentation work. You saw some of their staffers in Zelda's film. They represent children in military detention. They give free legal services. And they document and take affidavits, and they prepare for advocacy both at the UN and as we see in the last few years here in the United States. So all their work has been really, factually based documentation, and DCI, I'll just refer to it as DCI Palestine. DCI is one of many human rights organizations that have over the years documented this widespread and systematic abuse of Palestinian children, and particularly the whole experience of putting children in detention. Since the year 2000, there have been 10,000 children held in Israeli military detention. So that gives you a sense of like a little bit of the scope. That doesn't include children that are detained, like the young boy Marwan, just for a couple of hours. Those are people who've actually been through the military system between the ages of 12 and 18. So anyway, DCI Palestine came to a conference that we organized in Chicago in 2013, and it was a faith-based conference, kind of like the Sabio conferences that probably some of you have attended over the years. And they gave a presentation, a workshop at the conference. And when we were doing our summary about like what was the best workshop, because we had, of course, 100 of people, more than 100 people, lots of workshops. Those were the days when we could meet in person. I long for those. But that workshop was particularly popular, and people said, it's such a powerful story, the story of children. And really, any of us who've spent time there will remember how many kids we saw. 47% of the West Bank is under the age of 18 years. And in refugee camps like that Ida camp, they mentioned that 60% of the residents are children. So when you go there, you just see kids everywhere. They're playing in the streets. They come out to greet you. It's a very family-centered community experience. So I think the concern for kids, and also just I think as we work for a better future for Palestinians and Israelis, we really depend on the next generation, right? We all know that we're just planting seeds for the future, and what we want to give to younger people and have a better life for them than what Palestinians have experienced in the last few decades. So that was really the motivation. But it was also at the time 2013, 2014, that the BDS movement, boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement in the United States, was gaining ground. There was, I know probably some of you were involved in the SodaStream boycott. There were a lot of divestment resolutions happening on college campuses and also in faith communities. And it was really creating, I think, a important change in the discourse in this country around Palestine. I've been doing this work since 1982 was my first visit there. So more than half my life. It really seemed that people were starting to understand this conflict is about rights as well. You know, it's about a lot of things, but includes a conversation about rights and the occupation and so forth. And it seemed that more people were starting to get it in the United States, that there were, more open discussion than what we've seen, or what I've seen certainly in the last 30 years. So there was beginning to be some opening, and we thought to ourselves, well, we always know that the last place to change is going to be Congress and the administration. But let's just see if we might try a targeted campaign that would try to influence Congress on a particular issue. Not, for many years we called for the end of U.S. military aid to Israel. There were some efforts to try to stop supporting settlements. And none of that was really gained traction. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. But I think that what we felt with this campaign was that instead of always the first conversation with Congress was always about, well, what about Israel's security? Like Israeli security was always the first frame to have the conversation about, instead of, well, what about human rights? So I think that we've seen a shift in that, and in 2015 was the first time that we found a member of Congress, Representative Betty McCollum, who is from Minnesota, good Midwesterner, didn't have much, she's an Army brat. She did a lot of work around natural resources and Native American issues, but really didn't have a particular connection to the Middle East. But when we brought her the documentation from DCI Palestine and UNICEF and Human Rights Watch and even the State Department's human rights reports, and said, look at all this evidence. You sit on the Appropriations Committee. Every year you're giving $3.8 billion of military aid to Israel. And can you tell us that this aid money isn't going to subsidize this sort of abuse of children? And that really stopped her. Her staff shared with us at the time that even though they had been following this issue for many, many years, obviously, they didn't know that children were being arrested in military courts without the due process rights and without the protections that should be afforded to all children. And that really bothered her. And so the campaign kind of started off slowly with her office. In 2015, we did a Dear Colleague letter. We thought maybe we'd get 2 or 3 other members of Congress. Remember, this is before the squad. This was before Rashida Tlaib was elected. This, was a different, even just, now 6 years ago. It was definitely a different environment. And at that point, 19 members of Congress signed that first Dear Colleague letter. And it was like a wake-up call. It was, okay, so maybe there is maybe we can find some allies in Congress, and let's try to see what more we can do. So every year, like a campaign that's supposed to build and get stronger as you go, not weaker, we started with this first Dear Colleague bill, and then the second year, another one that was calling for a special envoy. This was when under Secretary Kerry was in office. And then after those first two letters, we saw the first bill in 2017, the first bill in U.S. history that focused on Palestinian rights, which was H.R. 4391, that was introduced by Betty McCollum and gathered 30 other members of Congress in its lifespan, that was very specifically asking for certification that U.S. funds would not underwrite the type of abuses that you saw in the film. And so that was exciting for us. 30 members of Congress doesn't mean a bill's going to pass. There's a long way from the 213 or something I think you have to get. And at that time, the Foreign Relations Committee chair was Eliot Engel, who was defeated in the last election, by the way, but was really a block to any kind of progress and conversation about Palestine in the Foreign Relations Committee in the House. But nonetheless, we really were excited, not just only that there were some members of Congress who were willing to speak out and be public about this issue, but that so many people around the country, the United States, started to engage with us and have conversations about this abhorrent practice, including the United Church of Christ and the Episcopalians and the Presbyterians and all these various groups and also Jewish groups that would speak out about this pretty terrible experience for Palestinian children, and to call for accountability. So where we are headed is, so we've now had two bills in Congress, and it was a rough 4 years. The last 4 years, for many reasons, was a challenging one, including for Palestine, and any hopes to see progress was pretty challenging with the embassy move and the expansion of settlements and the cutoff of aid. In this documentary, the first one of Gelazon camp, you saw the kind of conditions, and imagine that UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Work Agency that administers the camps to 5 million Palestinian refugees, the fact that the last administration cut all U.S. aid to that agency, and still we haven't had a firm commitment yet from the Biden administration to restore that. It's just it's criminal, really, that lifeline has been cut off. So where we are with the No Way to Treat a Child campaign is we are about to launch a new bill. It's in the works right now. I saw an early draft of it, and it will be similar to previous bills that does center the need to certify U.S. funds not be used to perpetuate these kind of actions that you saw here of the abuse of children in Israeli detention, forced confession, solitary confinement, all these practices. It will also include some language about home demolitions, which has been increasing actually since January. I mean, imagine during a pandemic with increased home demolitions. it's just incredible. And no comments yet from the Biden administration about that, despite that being, I think OCHA, the UN agency, said that there's a 200% increase since January in the demolition of Palestinian structures, mostly in Area C, which was also talked about in the film. So the bill will mention home demolitions and demolitions of Palestinian schools and other things that are obviously affect child welfare. And there also will be some language similar to a bill that was introduced last summer about annexation. There was a bill, HR 8050, that talked about that no U.S. funds should go contribute in any way to Israeli and further annexation. I'm sorry, it's late. It's almost it's 10:30 my time. Look up the bill. You'll see what the language is, but it's about annexation, not recognizing annexation. So I'm excited about this bill. I think it will get much broader support. We hope it'll get broader support. There are definitely some new members of Congress in the House that were elected this time around who are very progressive. So we're going to be increasing our numbers on that. Also, we hope to move on the Senate this time. So far, there hasn't been a Senate bill yet, but we hope that might change as well this year. Or with this Congress. And the great thing about a new bill is that it gives us an ask, gives us in the grassroots and out here in Chicagoland or wherever you happen to be, an opportunity to go to talk to a member of Congress again about this issue. And really always, the child detention issue, I think it's, on the one hand, it's a great talking point to help explain what it means, the occupation. I mean, you could just see in this film, yes, it's about detention of children, but the question then is, why is Israel doing this? What are they trying to get out of this practice? Why are they putting pressure on children? Why do they want families to leave? What's the purpose of Army night raids? All these questions, which are important questions for a country that's giving $3.8 billion a year to Israel to be asking. And it's, I'm going on and on, not getting to any of your other questions, but that's a little bit about the campaign and where we're headed. And I can say more. There's some other things that are coming up, but I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. We do have a number of questions. The first that I'll ask, because it relates to what you were just talking about, Catherine asked if we know a number yet for the bill.
No, because it has to go through the legislative committee, and then it goes to a quote hopper, which is where they actually give it a number. So we got lucky with the last time. It was 2407, which was easy to remember because I always said we work on this issue 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So I could always remember 2407. So hopefully they'll give us a great number this time, but I don't think it's going to be 2407, but no number yet. And as long as you're following the No Way to Treat a Child campaign on Twitter and Facebook, and if you've signed up by email on our list, that'll be the first place you'll hear that there's a new bill out. And as I said, a draft is circulating, so it's, but life is unpredictable during this pandemic, so I can't say what day it'll be out or,
Thank you. My next question, I'm not sure if this is better for Jennifer or Catherine to answer. Maybe you both could. Marge asked, where is the refugee camp that was in the first film? So the YWCA film.
That's Jelazone Camp, which is in the Ramallah district. It's if you go on the road from Ramallah up north to Nablus, it's on that road. So north of Ramallah, it's also close to Birzeit village and to Birzeit University. Yeah, that's where it is. And you know, it's interesting that that young boy, it made me think of the whole wheelchair issue and accessibility. I know this film and our campaign focuses on the West Bank, but in Gaza, there are now 1,600 people, amputees. So just let that sink in. 1,600 amputees mostly from the sniper shots from the Great March of Return in the last few years. So yeah, the need is so great.
My next question is a bit more of a question for the audience. So maybe if anyone wants to turn on your video for a moment, we'll do a raise of hands. John wondered, how many watching tonight have been to Palestine?
Yeah. So most of them. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I counted at least 11 hands. Thank you.
I'd like to answer that question about the wheelchair. We are by the 17th of March, we will have the ability for you to be able to donate for that wheelchair through the UCC Global Ministries. It costs approximately $4,500 to get an electronic wheelchair for him. That's the price of one we would buy in Ramallah, most likely. But that's what they go for over there. And to send it over costs a ton of money. So that's the direction we'll go to get one for him, if we can get that donation. With everybody chipping in.
Thanks, Catherine. Jennifer, next question. Can you tell us about the documentation that went into the making of the second film?
Yeah, so Zelda actually was living in Palestine. I think she was a volunteer, I want to say in the Bethlehem district. And she saw a film that we made in 2015 called Detaining Dreams that was also integrated in your UCC curriculum, How Are the Children, that Tom Spellman and a few of you others worked on. So she saw that film and she really liked how in that film we kind of went through the stages of detention. So all the documentation, this idea that things are systematic, because they're so systematic, it's real easy, not easy, I mean, you can kind of mark the process of how children are arrested until how they are charged and held and sentenced. Mostly, I mean, 75% of the charge is stone throwing, and 99% of children that go to military court are convicted. So that's military justice. So the process of the night raids and the blindfold and then taking them, transporting them by jeep to be held in pretrial kind of detention, where they, as the children shared in this film as well, the kind of pressure on them to confess, not having access to a lawyer, not being able to see their parents, and then going before a military court where sometimes, the court is conducted in Hebrew. Often children meet their lawyer right at the time of the court, and that might be the only time that they see their parents, and they're not allowed to speak to their parents. It's really, I attended a military court session, and that's just absolutely heartbreaking. And then after they are sentenced, then they're held in detention, and as they said in the film, 60% of them are held outside of the West Bank, so that they're held inside of Israel, so taken out of the occupied territories, which makes it difficult for family members to visit them. Children also don't have like phone calls. They don't have a lot of the typical type of visits that one might hope that children would have. So so the documentation that Zelda used was, based on this kind of process that was been documented by all these different organizations of this kind of system, and then she was there and she interviewed all those remarkable people in the film, and yeah.
Thanks. They were remarkable. When you were speaking about the bill that you are advocating for, Rick asked, what will certification that no U.S. funds are used to imprison children mean if the funds can be shifted from one purpose to another? In other words, they can use Israeli funds for that purpose and use the U.S. money to reimburse themselves.
Right. So it obviously it's not it won't be a bill that says cut the aid, but what it will say is that, so right now U.S. aid to Israel doesn't have any kind of certification about, there's no tracking, so that the money is given and then nobody seems to know how it's used. There are some things that are tracked, like procurement and purchase of weapons and so forth. So there is some record of that. So these bills have been, and their address to the State Department is that they're asking for certification. So tracking. So tell us, we want certification from the government agencies that this money isn't being used to detain children and for all these other human rights violations. And if they can't, then that would prompt, well, then we need to withhold funds. But that whole process of like saying we need to track the money, and we want to ensure that these violations, that we are not at all underwriting these violations, is what the bill is about. So it's it's a step toward accountability. It's not, and that's what it, it's all about a conversation, right? It's all about telling, making people aware. Many people aren't even aware of how much military aid we give to Israel, and they're not aware of the importance of the cuts in funding that the United States has done to UNRWA and to the Palestinian Authority, and how that impacts children's lives and so forth. So there's a lot that we could be talking about. And at the beginning of the program, Catherine mentioned the whole issue of the vaccines and access to the vaccines, and there have been, due to international pressure, there some vaccines are starting to enter the West Bank and Gaza, but there's no program. There's no there's some doses getting in, but there's no program in place, and Israel is not taking its responsibility as the occupying power to provide that access. I think if any of you've been following the issue closely, you'll see from the doctors and medical professions who are working over there talk about how even if they had the vaccines, how the whole delivery of health services is so challenging in the West Bank and Gaza for different reasons. But if you saw in the film all the checkpoints and all the roadblocks and all that, you can imagine how difficult it is for people to access medical care, to do follow-up appointments, to keep things refrigerated. I mean, it's really a nightmare. And from the American Friends Service Committee staff, some of our staff members have gotten COVID and have talked about the experience of workers who, are afraid to, if they are sick, they're afraid to admit it because they need to work, and they want to get to their jobs in Israel, and others who don't have a choice, and it's just heartbreaking, the whole thing. So we do have a petition on the No Way to Treat a Child campaign that we started about a year ago now, calling for the release of all Palestinian children in detention due to COVID, since the ability, and there have been some cases of Palestinian children in prison who have gotten COVID, and some of them were kept there, which was pretty harrowing. But that petition is online. We can maybe put a link in the chat. We have over 60,000 people have signed that petition, so it's a good. Once again, it was a very useful thing to bring people's attention to, the risks to incarcerated people in this country, but also in Palestine, and particularly children during the pandemic. Just the lack of hygiene, access to medical care, and also, with the lockdown. I mean, the West Bank is on lockdown right now due to the pandemic, and so of course that means no visits, and we all have experienced a little bit about what it feels to be locked down, but we haven't had 13 years of it like Palestinians in Gaza, and most of us have electricity unless we're in Texas, and so I'll put the link to that COVID petition. We also have a new petition about solitary confinement, because we saw a disturbing trend of more and more children being put in solitary confinement as a way to elicit confessions. And DCI collected over 100 affidavits of children experiences in solitary confinement, which, I'm sorry, putting 14-year-olds in solitary confinement, it's just not for disciplinary reasons, but just to,
Well, we have more questions than we'll have time for, but I will ask one last one, and apologies to folks whose questions I didn't get to. Shaylin asked, how is it that in the US, the dialogue has been predominantly pro-Israel in the face of all of this? Is it because Israel is a military ally of the US?
Sorry, I'm putting that link in. Well, let's see. that's a long question to ask, a long answer for that. I guess I would abbreviate it by saying that there is historic ties between the United States and Israel. If you look at when military aid to Israel started to increase was during the Cold War, when the United States wanted to have a strong ally in the Middle East to combat communism. So you see during that time the beginnings of more and more military aid, and actually since 1967, but really later did the increase was built. And I think that that between the supporters of the Israeli government in this country, which include Zionists, including Christian Zionists, have been very vocal about their support for Israel, and they're well organized and have run campaigns and have been able to create a narrative. And I'm always surprised when I actually have had people say, "Oh, I thought that Palestinians were occupying Israel." I was like, "What?" People don't, they don't understand the enormous disparity between Israelis and Palestinians. The fact that B'Tselem came out this January with a new report saying that apartheid exists from the sea to the River Jordan, like that was once again kind of like shining a light on, well, what do many people wonder, what does it mean to call something apartheid? Why is that? And they don't know that there are two sets of law that exists in one territory, that Palestinian children are under military rule, whereas Israeli children living in settlements are under civilian law. So all these kind of basic things that all of us who've been there know, I don't think most Americans aren't exposed to that experience. All of us on this call are ambassadors in some way of like telling the story and sharing what we've seen and trying to change people's hearts and minds on this issue just from our own lived experiences. And I think that it's making a difference. I certainly feel like the narrative and the discourse about what is happening has changed. I think the kind of people like Mark Lamont Hill and others who are speaking out and making the parallels to civil rights issues in this country, to the experience of Black and brown people living under white supremacy. And people are looking with different lens at the issue, and I think that is changing the discourse. I'll just say one thing. I heard an interview with somebody who worked under the Obama administration, Ben Rhodes. I don't know if any of you saw the interview with him, and he was speaking with Peter Beinart just a week ago, I think it was, and he said that when President Obama went to Ramallah, he met with some Palestinian students there, and the last one came up to him and said, "Look, Obama, look, President, I thought that you, because you're an African American and knows oppression, would be with us as Palestinians, because we also are without rights. And not only do you not understand us and you don't seem to empathize with us, but you're actually paying for our oppression." And Ben Rhodes said that Obama just was like, he couldn't say anything. He just was like silenced by that. And he thinks, Ben Rhodes says, like, that really that really Obama did know. So I don't know why I brought that up, but just to say that even when people are exposed with seeing things the way they are, they don't necessarily, that doesn't move them along unless there is a movement of people like all of us on this call that just keep at it, keep saying, no, this doesn't represent our values. It doesn't represent our what we believe will bring peace and justice in the region. That we just have to keep raising our voices, and we have to get better organized, and we have to have better, more people elected that share our perspectives. So, yeah.
So Jennifer, it's time for me to pick up the slack here and thank you first off for all your wisdom and work that you continue to do. I'm so impressed with you and always have been with what you have done. So thank you for being with us tonight, and I want to thank everybody for being with us tonight. Next week, we will see a film from the Parent Circle, which is a very positive group. It's Israeli Jews and Muslims and people in the West Bank and who are meeting together. These are folks who've lost family members who support one another. It's a beautiful group. And we'll see a film called Seeing Through the Wall, and that's a Parent Circle film. And also we'll see Palestine Now 2017. But both of these films really give a different view into what's going on in Palestine, Israel. Different aspects, more on the focus on settlers and other pieces that we haven't really focused on as much. Ned Roche will be our responder. He's a Jew with roots in Israel as well as the Holocaust. And he has spent time in Gaza working to comfort and heal people there after bombings and raids. And this evening, so I hope you'll be with us next week. And this evening we will close with a prayer from my friend Maria Corey, who's a friend from Palestine and America. And she will lead us in prayer tonight. She's from a little village called Taibe, which means good and pleasant. And Taibe is a town named since the 12th century for biblical Ephraim. One of the most ancient places in Palestine, has remained a Christian village since the time of Christ. Jesus escaped Jerusalem before his passion to spend time in Ephraim, mentioned in John 11:54. The local residents were baptized and continue to follow the commandment to love thy neighbor and love thy enemy until this day. Taibe is a half hour north of Jerusalem and 10 minutes up from Jericho. So welcome, Maria, if you will please lead us all in prayer after we take a deep breath from all that we've heard and seen.
Thank you. It was just such an amazing, beautiful fellowship. Thank you for having me. And I wish all of you a blessed evening and just a blessed Lent. Our God of light, please guide us by your true light and peace, so we may see the humanity in one another. Help us to find creative solutions, out of the box solutions for these innocent children on this film, so we may learn to share the holy city of Jerusalem, which has had so much bloodshed in the name of religion. Keep our hope. Please keep our hope to find a genuine broker who can help Israeli and Palestinian leaders transform and transcend beyond this 20 years of deadlock, frozen peace deal, and 73 years of intense conflict with so much loss of innocent lives, innocent children, displacement. Please, please keep our hope alive that we can have basic human rights for all people in the very land that is so holy to Christians, Muslims, and Jews, and so many others too. Please let us walk in your path of light, in your path of peace. Guide us by your grace and spirit of truth for a just peace, and continue to strengthen the peacemakers and the nonviolent action. Amen.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you, one and all. See you next week.
Thanks. Bye, Catherine.
Bye-bye. Thank you.